I just got back from LS Fest and it was absolutely crazy. There was every build under the sun there, from money's no option, $100,000+ builds to very basic. I just got this motor out of a junkyard, threw it in the car, and I drove it here the next day. So we're gonna talk about how I would do an LS swap if I were to do it right now. So what I would do is depending on your situation. So we'll talk about a couple different scenarios. So say if you're kind of like how I was with this car, I had a running driving car. It was a 78 Camaro, and I already had a turbo 350 transmission in it. Okay, good. Stop right there. If your car's running, it's got a turbo 350 in it, you want to do an LS swap, you do not have to do a one of the newer computer controlled transmissions like a 4L60 or whatever. It's nice to have the 4-speed if you want it, but if you're happy with the way your car drives now, you just maybe want a little bit more power, maybe your small block went out or whatever. An LS will bolt up to a turbo 350 or turbo 400 just fine. It's the exact same bolt pattern. So if you already have a transmission, you know, from basically transmission back, you don't have to worry about your drive shaft or anything, I would get like a bare bones 5.3 from Facebook Marketplace. That's usually the easiest place to source one. You can go to the junkyard and get them pretty easy as well, but you know, you might have to pull it yourself. You know, you got to go to the junkyard and all that other stuff if you're strapped for time. Sometimes Facebook's easier, and you can see the prices, right? So junkyards are, you know, it's kind of hard to just say, like, you get on their websites, they're like, oh yeah, this one's, you know, $500 or, you know, 800, 900. You never, they're all over the place. You don't know exactly how much it is until you get there. So at least with Facebook, I can talk to, you know, I can message 15 people today, and, you know, I can find the best deal. So let's just say, if you're just going for just the motor for right now, I would look at something like this. So this is a 5.3 out of a 06 Chevy. Make sure you get everything on it. Do not buy a bare block LS. You're gonna get nickeled and dimed to death. I know it's $300, right? It's tempting. You're like, hey, this is a $300 motor. I'm gonna buy that and be just fine. But by the time you go and you add that dang power pump or power steering pump, your water pump, your crank, your pulleys, your tensioner, all that crap, by the time you add all that, you're gonna get nickeled and dimed to death. And then you need a harness, then you need the ECU. It's ridiculous. So don't do that. And the way I look at it, if somebody has a motor tore apart and then they don't want it, there's probably a freaking reason, right? Maybe it has a cracked head or something, or who knows what's wrong with it. You know, cracked piston, you know, maybe it's just shot. So I would buy the most complete LS motor I could find with everything on it. The harness is, you know, harness is just laid up on top of the motor. Everything's there. That's what I would look for. The best way is really with the donor vehicle that you could drive to your house and you know you're getting something good. The second best is find a crashed vehicle. Like if somebody's selling the motor and you're looking at their Facebook post and they said, oh yeah, you know, I totaled my truck and I'm just trying to part it out. So at least you know it was running while it was wrecked. So the chances of you having like major problems are a lot less versus just a bare LS where you don't know where it came from, right? And it's missing half the crap. So if you don't have anything in your car and it's just a straight roller, I would get the 5.3 and the transmission combo. It's hard to beat that unless you specifically want to run, you know, a turbo 350 or 400, then, you know, it's a lot easier to find like a drive shaft and everything else, because it's just everything will be in the factory location. But if not, I would do something like this. This one's $1,600. To me, that's a little pricey. I paid $1,200 for this 5.3 and a transmission that came out of a Tahoe. So, and it had everything on it. Everything was there, wasn't missing nothing. So that's probably the best way to go, is have everything, right? So now let's talk about getting the motor in the car. So we'll just work our way down. So you have your motor, you have your transmission. If you're using your stock one, it'll bolt right up to it. If you're using a 4L60E or whatever, there's all kinds of LS mounts for pretty much any vehicle. I don't care what you're swapping this in. If it's a damn, you know, RX-8, freaking, you know, some Miata, there is kits out there for everything. If it's any kind of a classic car, you know, there's kits for days. Everything you need's out there. Motor mounts for me, I just used the ICT billet, like universal motor mounts, and it mounted right up to where my small block Chevy mounted up, exactly the same. It's just a little adapter plate. Super simple. They're not that expensive. I'll put a link to those down below. All right, so now that the car has a motor in it, it's sitting in there, right? So you bought it with all the accessories if you're smart. And now let's talk about, now you got to cool it. So radiator wise, for a quick example, they do sell LS specific radiators. So this is a radiator for this car, but the problem is it's for the small block, and that's why your outlet's way over there. But if you get an LS specific one, your inlet and outlet will be on the same side. So make sure you purchase the right one. But this thing is not that expensive. You get fans and everything else, so that's nice. And it's not that, it was like, I don't know, like 200 something bucks or something. I'll put a link to that down below. They're not that expensive. So that's what I would do. If you have a decent radiator in your car already, chances are if it cools a small block, it's going to cool an LS with no problem. Now let's talk about the computer system. All right, so if you bought it with your harness already in it, you're going to need to unlock it because it's going to have VATS enabled. Sometimes people will sell these LSs and they'll say they're unlocked. If you can get that, that's cool, especially if you're not planning on doing any kind of like crazy tuning or anything else. But for every LS swap, I highly recommend just getting HP tuners from the get-go, because chances are you're probably going to do a cam, exhaust and all this other stuff. And those motors that came down, they come pretty powered down anyways. So you can wake it up quite a bit just by a tune alone. And so I'd get HP tuners or pay somebody to tune it. That's your two different options. The HP tuner's like $3.99 or so, and then it costs $100 to unlock for every vehicle. So LS wise, now if you get it HP tuners, you want to unlock your 2024 Silverado, it's going to cost way more than $100. HP tuners has like this little system where you buy credits or whatever, but pretty much every like bare bones LS kind of thing is like $100 to unlock. So that's the way I would do it. You're going to want to set up the harness as like a standalone system. So the big old giant factory fuse box with all those relays in it, you don't need all of that. There's a ton of videos online on how to actually, convert your LS harness to a standalone. But basically what that does is it has your LS running off just a couple of wires. Like you need one wire from your car that goes into this here. See this little box right here? So this little box will control your fans, your fuel pump, and the computer. And basically off just, a couple of hot wires and like a signal 12 volt from your ignition. And that's all you're gonna need to run your LS. So it's super simple. You look at that harness, it's kind of like daunting on how many wires are coming off that harness, but most of it's going to, all the sensors on the motor and the computer, but the only parts that connect to your car are just a handful, like 5 or 6 wires, and it could actually be running. Like it's surprisingly simple once you get into it. There's tons of videos on that. This isn't really like an in-depth how-to. This is just kind of, top level. Now that we got the harness figured out, I will talk about a couple of different routes you can go. Depending on your budget and your power goals. Out of the box, like one of the best ways to do it is probably with the Terminator X, because you can get that and grow with you. If you're just slapping this in your car and you don't want to ever touch it, you're not interested in tuning and making a whole lot more power, and you just want something that's drivability, stock is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, if you're wanting to throw on Pro Chargers, turbos and stuff, now let's start looking at like the Terminator X systems. Depending on which transmission you're running, if you're running like a 4L60 or 4L80 or one of the newer transmissions, you're gonna have to buy the more expensive Terminator X that controls the transmission. The cheaper Terminator X, I think it's like $1,500-ish, and you're using a Turbo 400, it doesn't come with the transmission controller. That's fine, because Turbo 400s they don't need or Turbo 350s, they don't need a dang computer to run them. They'll run off vacuum, or if you do a manual valve body in them or whatever. So the Terminator X is an excellent way to go. It can grow with you. It's going to be easier to use out of the box, or you're not hacking stuff up and trying to make things work and cutting out fuse boxes. The other thing is for your harness, they do have these ones on Amazon. Here, I'll show a few of those. I'll put a link to those down below. They're like 120 bucks, but they already have your standalone little fuse box system in there, and I'm sure they have instructions. I've talked to some people that have used them, and they recommend them. If you look around the forums and stuff, people say they're great. Some other people say they had to like tweak a few things. But that's one good way to do it, because one thing is if you go to the junkyard and they basically just freaking cut cut those harnesses right out of there. So, and drag the motors with the forklift and slam them on the ground. So you really don't know. Like my LS had busted sensors all over the place. Like it was wrecked. Like I had a hard time getting the harness like straight. I had to fix a few things on it. All right, so fuel system wise. So this car had, you know, the mechanical fuel pump that was mounted at the front of the motor with the small block or whatever. There's a ton of different ways you can do this. So they have drop-in systems that, you know, you drop your tank, you put it like where you put your sitting unit in. They have a fuel pump there that's made for LS. I think you need like 60 PSI or so to be safe. The easiest way to do it is one of these knockoff Bosch fuel pumps. They're like $50 or less, and it comes with everything you need to mount it. And then you just mount this to the frame of your car, and your stock fuel rail that's coming, or fuel lines are coming off the tank, you just hook to this pump and it comes up to the front. And depending on which LS you get, some of them have a return style where you just, you know, hook up to your factory return and it goes back to the tank, or you can run your own. For me on this car, I did mine a little bit differently. 2 fuel lines coming off. So on my car, I just welded that sump on there, and one of those is returned and one of them is going to the fuel pump. I have a carburetor, so just kind of ignore that. The fuels, I use the same exact fuel setup on EFI and carbureted. I just changed the pressure, okay? So if you have fuel rails, you know, one goes to one fuel rail, comes out, goes to the regulator, and then goes back to the tank. I can make a more in-depth video on the fuel system specifically. If you guys have any questions about that part of it, you know, just drop a comment down below. Let's talk about the throttle. LS came in 2 different ways: drive-by-wire, drive-by-cable. Drive-by-cable, obviously we know what that is. There's a manual cable that goes from your pedal to the throttle body. Okay, so the Camaros, like the 02 to 98, they came like that. Most of your trucks and vans came with drive-by-wire. Some of them were drive-by-cable. So when you're picking out your LS, whatever way it came is the way I recommend it, and I'll tell you why. So this is a drive-by-cable PCM, and if you look at this little section right here, these little pins at this section, so if you're looking at it like this, there's these little pins, they stick out. This controls your IAC valve in your throttle body, right? So basically there's a little mechanical piece in there that opens and closes and gives your motor the amount of air that it wants to stay idling. If you convert your drive-by-wire or if you convert your drive-by-wire to drive-by-cable and your PCM doesn't have this, you're gonna have to manually set your idle, and you're gonna have all kinds of like cold start problems. You know, when it gets hot and cold, your motor will be trying to, you know, it won't find where it'll idle properly without this, right? Because it'll need more or less air. So a drive-by-wire PCM, see right here, it's smooth. So that's the easiest, quickest way without trying to look at VINs and all this other crap. If you just have a PCM standalone for whatever reason, if this is smooth right here, there's no pins, drive-by-wire only, okay? If you made the mistake like I did, you're gonna have all kinds of idling and starting problems because, you know, the drive-by-wire throttle bodies, like, they're like way more expensive, right? So you can go get $100 drive-by-cable. If you buy $100 cheapo drive-by-wire throttle body, like, you could have all kinds of problems. And something is kind of freaky about having a $100 part actually control the you know, the throttle of your car electrically. It kind of freaks me out. So if you have a 78 Camaro, whatever, don't be worried about the drive-by-wire. All you can do is just get one of these, you know, GM pedals, and it'll plug right into the harness, and you're all right. You might have to do a little bit of soldering or whatever, but I'll put a link down below so you can use either one. Just make sure you have the right PCM for it. If you do like the Terminator X series and all that, you have to do a little bit more research on those. I'm sure they kind of go both ways as well. So for me, on this car, the third way that I prefer doing it, just because it's the absolute simplest way, is a MSD box. So you can get an MSD box to control your motor. It will not control your transmission, so you got to have a, you know, a manual or a, you know, turbo 350 or 400. and just a regular drive-by cam. It's a carburetor. Everything's the same. It only uses 2 sensors: your crank position sensor and your cam position sensor, and it has the temperature sensor on it that's optional, but that's it. So if you are like a small block guy and you're kind of on the fence about doing an LS swap and you're more comfortable with the carburetor, this is the way to do it. MSD box, it's like $500. You throw that in there and you're set, right? Because I know those small blocks are getting more expensive and hard to find. I got pretty good money for the one. I think I got like $2,500 or something for the small block that was in here, and it was like rebuilt like 20 years ago. It was running good. It was a really solid motor, but it was real mild. So and then power steering, right? So I have, for this car, because I wanted it to like look a little better, you can totally use the factory setup accessories. I got the ICT billet relocation kit. So this motor came out, this is a 5.3 out of 04 Tahoe. Again, I have this ICT billet relocation kit that put my power steering pump up top and my alternator down below. Flipping that, I have more room for my power steering and all that over there. So for power steering pump, you just need a couple of little adapters, and I am using the factory, power steering box that was on this car, and that pump works just fine. It's just a hose, super simple. All right, so let's talk about exhaust. The factory LS headers are actually really good. They flow pretty well. It's not like the old school days where if you get headers, you gain all this horsepower. You might gain like 20 or 30 or so, or maybe even less. Those LS headers flow really well. So you can use the factory ones as long as it fits in your frame rails. I'll throw a link down below on some like basic budget ones that pretty much work for everything. All right, before you buy a single thing, write everything down. Write your power goal down. How much power do you want to make? What transmission do you want to run? And then pick your motor. 5.3, 4.8 LS is the easiest. If you want to get into the LS7s and the big stuff, totally cool. Just figure out what you want to do before you buy it, and then go out and start buying this stuff. Don't get excited and just go buy the first LS that comes up with a transmission on it or whatever. So now that we got the basic overall scope of your LS swap, now let's talk into your power adders and stuff like that. For me, I always recommend a cam. Who doesn't want to wake up their car? And the cams on these cars, doing a cam swap on this car really ups the horsepower, makes it sound great. Who doesn't want a freaking thumping cam? So this is for me, I did a Truck Norris cam, and while I was in there, do it before you put the motor in the car. Don't do it while it's in the car. That's dumb. So if you know you're going to do a cam swap, do it before then, because you can get it on your engine stand, rotate it over, check the bearings out and everything else. When I pulled the factory cam out of this car, the cam bearings came out with it. They were shot. They were destroyed. So I put new cam bearings in it, and that's not that expensive. I'll throw some link to some cam bearings down below. They're like $50. I did the Truck Norris cam. The Truck Norris cam thups pretty good. I love the way it sounds. That's one cool thing, that if you do have the HP tuners, so the computer really can change the way the cam sounds. So if you do end up with the MS or with the HP tuner route in your factory computer, you can really play with the idle on these things and basically make a lope tune. And a lope tune mixed with an actual aftermarket cam can be just nasty. That's how you get that really big chop 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 out of a little 5.3. So that's kind of fun. But for me, I have the MSD system, so however the cam sounds is how it's going to sound. There's not really a way that I can play with that like you can with the factory computer. Also, do you want to do a turbo? Okay, so before you throw your motor in your car, if you know you're going to do a turbo, well, if you're doing the EFI system, the factory truck intake will work really good. The Trailblazer SS intakes work really good. Or some of those aftermarket ones like the Hollies, or if you want something shiny like this one. I had that on this car previously when it was EFI. But you're going to need injectors, which get kind of pricey. So that is kind of where I drew the line and went away from EFI and tuning it and all that, because I suck at trying to tune this thing, to be honest, on the HP tuners. So I didn't want to deal with tuning, and I was having injector problems because I was trying to be cheap, and I bought decapped injectors. Some people use them, have great luck with them. I couldn't get this car to tune and build boost for nothing. I tried for months, and I think I was having injector problems. I had crappy injectors. So I said, screw that. And I went to this blow through carburetor route and never looked back. Like ever since I did that, I can run like this. So you see the car sounds great, rips, it's freaking awesome. The blow through carburetor thing is hands down the coolest. And yeah, it's just super simple. Like for the price of injectors, like a good set of injectors, there's like $1,000 to $1,200 for good injectors that you'll need to do a turbo, right? For $200 and $100 intake and the MSD system, so all in I'm like $800. And if I would have started from that, it would have been way cheaper. But for a $200 carburetor that I can mod myself and turn it into a blow through, like I am capable of factory ELS power just drive around. Sky's the limit. Who knows how much horsepower I could cram into that thing? Over 1,000, easily over 1,000 on E85 with a $200 carburetor. Like how freaking cool is that? So that's why I went to the carburetor route, because it'll grow with you, right? So you can choose whichever way you're comfortable. If you're a small block guy and you've been doing that your whole life, you're probably gonna want to do the carburetor just because it's what you know. LS Fest, it was pretty crazy, is that like for whatever, Pro Chargers seem to have gotten really popular. I don't know what it is. There's another brand of Pro Charger, I can't think of it off the top of my head right now, but it's this one right here. But I saw Pro Chargers everywhere. Like used to, I think the first time I went to LS Fest, I saw mainly turbos. And then all of a sudden, like all these damn Pro Chargers are everywhere. So that's a pretty cool build. If I were to do it today and I were going for like a lot of power and budget really didn't really matter, I would do a Pro Charger. Cause like, look at all this plumbing that's on this thing. And obviously I'm a crappy welder, so you can see all this plumbing, like, but I want the power, so I need a turbo. But if money were no problem, you mean tell me I just slap on a little Pro Charger on the side of this thing and make like, almost 1,000 horsepower anyways, without having to deal with, the wastegates and, all this other crap? That would be pretty dope. So that's the way that I would do it.